On May 8, 2006, a half-dozen trucks arrived at the St. Louis Zoo from Rochester, New York, carrying the pieces of a gigantic steel puzzle, a sculpture created for the zoo by Albert Paley called Animals Always. And this was just half of it. Another caravan of trucks was due later in the week. There was plenty of media coverage. Cameras and helicopters had picked up the convoy as it headed down the highway to the zoo. Among those on the ground, on hand for the arrival, Thelma Zalk, the woman who is giving this sculpture to the zoo, $1 million present. They hadn't even asked for it. In fact, Zalk wasn't even thinking about it until the day she met Albert Paley.
It's all very fluky. It's a thing that was meant to be. I was on an art tour, and they took us through we saw one of his works in front of Bausch and Lomb in Rochester, I think. Right. And he took us through his studio, which was very nice of him, on a Sunday morning. And in a corner was a piece. It was a bird made out of this. And I said, "What is that over there?" And he said, "That was a sample. That was a piece I was going to build for the New York Central Park Zoo." And they reneged on the deal. And I said, "It looks just fabulous." And so he showed me a picture of the whole gate. And I said, we should have something like this in St. Louis. And that's how it all started.
Animals Always is being billed as the largest zoo sculpture in the world. 130 feet long, 36 feet high. And if you're looking for big art, metal sculptor Albert Paley is the go-to guy. But this is big even for him. Paley began working on the drawings for the zoo sculpture in his Rochester studio years ago. And from that he created a cardboard model. The work would portray animals and their environments, from jungle to savanna to swamp and sea. Based on the drawing, Paley cut individual pieces and glued them all together, a process that would be redone in metal. First, on a small scale. The zoo had been working all along with him, advising on the theme and the kinds of animals they wanted featured. When all was agreed upon, the full-sized pieces, 1,300 of them, like this ear for the elephant, were cut from steel plates. In Paley's factory studio, the pieces still had to be bent, shaped, and then often reheated and bent some more to fit just so, where they would be welded into place. And the elephant and some 59 other animals began to emerge from the pieces. Upon completion, they were set aside, still shiny, but that would change when they were taken outside for assembly and weathering.
Let's straighten this out a little more. Okay, right there.
When the pieces were being brought together out in the workyard, Paley could finally see the full effect of this massive creation. He has made a lot of big sculptures, but they had always been abstract. The sculpture from the St. Louis Zoo was the first time Paley had taken on shaping things from the real world.
All of my other work is non-figurative. And so I'm dealing with structure and silhouette and form. This is structure and silhouette and form, but the thing is here that it's in a literal context. So for me, this was extremely challenging because I had to deal with the representation of naturalistic form.
While all of this was going on in Rochester, the zoo had some work to do back in St. Louis. While the $1 million paid for the sculpture, the zoo needed another $1 million to create a place to put it. That donation came from entrepreneur and zoo supporter Steve Shankman, and the money went to clearing the southeast corner of the zoo to create a plaza and a base for the Animals Always sculpture, so that it will dominate the Hampton Avenue entrance to the zoo and Forest Park, and the zoo hopes become an instant landmark.
All right, you see that joint? You see the joint there? You see the laser pointer?
Yeah.
Back in Rochester, Albert Paley had not just been admiring the big picture in his workyard. This was about decisions and details. It was about beauty and strength.
Very close to there. Okay. We're going to try it. This,
In addition to being literal, this is out of steel, therefore it has to be structural as well. So a lot of the elements that come together, which might appear like branches intertwining or leaves touching one another, in fact are structural systems. So there was the whole consideration of the integration of structure and also the visualization.
When the sculpture was all assembled in Rochester, it would be dismantled in large pieces, placed on flatbed trucks, and shipped off in the caravan to St. Louis for the installation. Paley's crew has done a lot of this kind of work. This is the Bausch & Lomb headquarters piece in Rochester that Thelma Zalk had seen. And although he does have pieces in museums, Paley's work is often commissioned to be both artistic and decorative. Early in his career, Paley started out making jewelry, and you could say that he is today making jewelry for buildings and cities and zoos. Which makes him different from an artist like Richard Serra, best known in St. Louis for the minimalist work called Twain on the Gateway Mall. Serra's work, like it or not, is intended to interact with the viewer and the surroundings, but not necessarily make it prettier. Serra does not decorate things. He does not make what you want according to your ideas or needs. You simply buy what he creates. And it was said when this was installed in the early 80s that St. Louis was the sort of place that might have preferred something more traditional, like, say, a statue of a man on a horse. But be careful what you ask for. At Hanley and Wydown is the sculpture entitled Man on a Horse, and a lot of people don't like this one either. Even the Millis Fountain, even the arch, are still subject to critique. But the city is filled with public art, and Animals Always is just the latest edition. Are you ready for, or have you already gotten any of the sorts of controversies and debate that always pretty much come with public art?
Yeah, I've wondered about that. We haven't heard a word. You know, it's been on display in the lower level of the living world. Probably 3 million people have seen it. And so far, we haven't got the first negative comment. But, you know, art is supposed to be, you know, intriguing and bring out different opinions in people. Thus far, everybody's just loved it, and it's been awed by it.
After the big arrival event was all wrapped up and the TV news crews had moved on, then it was time for the work crews to move in because, well, they've got to put this thing back together. The assembly is tricky business. This stuff weighs tons. In fact, the elephant weighs more than a real one. The crews need to lift this so the base plate is parallel to the ground because they will have to drop it straight down onto bolts already embedded in concrete. Every piece is a different size, weight, and shape, and each has to be rigged just so. This is made of Corten steel. When the pieces sat outside in Rochester, they developed a coating of rust that will protect them from further weathering. But where the steel sits on concrete, it needs an extra coating to prevent deterioration. The crews moving and installing the pieces were scheduled to work from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. Then Albert Paley's workers would work the day shift, welding it all together. They would have just 2.5 weeks to get it all done in time for a May 25th public ceremony, when the final piece would be set in place. And St. Louis would officially welcome Albert Paley's Animals Always to its new home.